Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. And John, I'd like to thank you for joining us. John, would you tell us something about Frances Kellor and economics? She worked with domestic workers early on and helped create state control over employment agencies and then created a network. So really the network of employment agencies run by the state that we have traces its origins back to her. We learn of the adventures behind the creation of these state employment agencies in Keller's 1904 book, Out of Work. Actually, Kellor wrote two books entitled Out of Work, one in 1904 and one in 1915, but the books are very different. In the 1904 book, Kellor and a bunch of women went undercover as maids to learn about their exploitation by evil employment agencies. These maids were recent European immigrants and African American women migrating north from America's southern states. Sensationally, Kellor found that a lot of these immigrant women were being sold into white slavery. White slavery. That is, prostitution. There's a lot of sensationalism in the 1904 Out of Work. The maids live at employment agencies, and inside are a lot of rats and criminals. But while we may not honor the sensationalism of bringing white slavery to the public, Kellor's topic was important. At the turn of the century, domestic maid work was the #1 form of employment for women, and many were young
Impoverished.
and alone and ripe for exploitation. Kellor proposed a nationally coordinated network of women to investigate employment agencies. She also passed laws to get the state to regulate the employment agencies. So it was in protecting the immigrant and African American maids that Kellor brought us the modern system of state employment agencies. And, in addition to creating the current network of state employment agencies, Kellor introduced the very idea of national responsibility for unemployment. In 1915, she published the second edition of her book, Out of Work. The 1915 version of Out of Work is very different than the 1904 version. The 1915 version is nearly twice as long as the earlier version, and rather than sensationalist, the 1915 version of Out of Work is dry. Rather than a close look at women in unemployment agencies, it gives us a broad overview of unemployment in America. While the 1904 version has only one chapter on men, the 1915 version has only one chapter on women. Here it is at the bottom. Notice the first chapter advocates taking a national approach to unemployment. Giving us the broad overview, in the following chapters we learn of children in the labor force and immigration and unemployment. The latter chapter is interesting. It defends immigrants. It shows statistically that immigrants do not take jobs from long-term Americans. And we're not going to look at the whole long table of contents, but here we see a chapter that advocates for unemployment insurance, which we now, of course, have. If you become unemployed, the government will give you money. And in the two final chapters of the 1915 version of Out of Work, Kellor talks about government regulations and then a national approach to unemployment in the chapter How America Relieves Unemployment. One contemporary reviewer noted that Kellor's national overview of unemployment was the first of its kind. In terms of Kellor's impact on us when we're at work and when we're out of work, Kellor's third contribution is workplace benefits. As the head of the Americanization movement, Kellor argued that exploiting workers, well, it was un-American. To quell worker unrest, employers should provide workers benefits such as vacation time, health care, and retirement plans. This would make for a strong America. Kellor's ideas had a much greater impact than others who might lay claim to the title of founding mother of modern America. When President Theodore Roosevelt read the 1904 Out of Work, he instructed his cabinet to read it. The book also made them fast friends. During Roosevelt's 1912 presidential campaign, he made Kellor the only woman on the campaign's 6-member executive committee. With this position, Kellor was able to write national policy planks. In 1916, this man, Charles Evans Hughes, was the Republican candidate for President of the United States. Kellor was the highest-ranking woman in this presidential campaign as well. She ran the women's wing. Again, the second version of Out of Work came out in 1915, and by 1916, she was in a nearly unique position to write national party platforms. This is, of course, President Woodrow Wilson. He beat Kellor's presidential campaigns in both 1912 and 1916. But even so, some of his National Party platforms, like his anti-suffrage planks, were responses to Kellor's planks. And even though she tried to defeat him in 1912 and 1916, President Wilson wrote a letter to his cabinet telling them that Kellor should have access to them any time. Thus, Kellor's 1904 and 1915 versions of Out of Work were important. Amongst claimants to the title of founding mother of modern America, none had Kellor's access to national policy formation. Which of these is the most important in America today?